name is Sadie Bowles, and I get the opportunity to run interviews or podcasts for the American Grass-Fed Association. And today we get the wonderful joy and delight of having Wayne Knight from Holistic Management International here. Wayne has proven to be excruciatingly knowledgeable in a lot of subject matters, but I've got him focused in, and we're going to talk about total utilization today, or the 100% graze. But to kick it off, Wayne, can you kind of give us a brief background on you, where you're from, and then how you got to be with HMI?
Fantastic, sure. So I started out as a rancher working with my dad, who was a early adopter of, let's call it Savory Parsons at the time, consulting. As a kid, a little boy, I remember the big consulting sessions where Stan, who's now founder of Ranching for Profit, and Alan, founder of HMI, would come out to the ranch for extended, over a week at a time, look through all aspects of the business, very much with consultant hats on. I think it was literally earth moving for the family, for my parents, to have that different way of thinking and that kind of analysis. It was the early days of holistic management. Non-selective grazing was the term back then. It's changed to all sorts of things, and they battled. And I think recovery periods were too short. Utilization was too high for their knowledge level and their genetics level. Dad backed off, developed a lot of infrastructure, traditional grazing cells. We're talking now leap forward. I came over to the States in the 90s, worked for some pretty impressive ranching operations, mostly affiliated with the Ranching for Profit. It would become Ranching for Profit then. Parsons and Savory had split. Really got a lot out of that work experience, that exposure. Before mentorships were mentorships, did a little bit of work with Stan, and then went back home, very arrogant, full of ideas, and made some pretty massive mistakes. Then did holistic management training, really got a lot out of the holistic plant grazing component. Wanted to learn more, became an educator just because of the wanting to learn more about how to be a good manager using this pretty involved planning process. In about 2006, completed the educator program, had lots of people visit our ranch farm in South Africa just to see what we were doing, and then was invited to join HMI's board, and then much later joined the organization as executive director. So I've been in the States now 5 years, having left the farm behind. And yeah, that's the story.
Okay, excellent. Do you ever plan on maybe getting back to the ranch?
South Africa is a tough place. We've decided that the kind of life we were living before we left South Africa was an active decision. We didn't want to live that life. That's not what our goal, that's not what our quality of life dictated. It was so far from what we wanted as our life. I became involved with all things peripheral to ranching. We were fighting mining. We were trying to prevent stock theft, both through organization. When you don't have a functioning legal system and don't have a functioning police, it's very, very difficult. You become the police, you become the judge, you become the executioner, all of those things. It's not a comfortable place, and that's not how we wanted to live. So we've decided to, as a family, move over here and have a new adventure. And that's spreading holistic management, because that's at the heart of what we do. And hopefully my experience as a rancher can inspire, assist other people to be interested and take on the journey that is, whatever you want to call it, regen ag, holistic management, just this different way of looking at nature, this different way of working with nature. We want to support that process. And I think holistic management is one of a number of tools but it's a really useful tool. I found it so valuable from a number of points of view, from the understanding ecology, understanding what it takes to work with nature when we've come from such a control-orientated agricultural system, use chemicals, enforce what we want on nature, extract has been the mindset. And this mind shift that you come to with regen ag or holistic management, I think, is profound. And then the real value is determining what is the most important thing to focus on, aligning with theory of constraint. We call it weak link analysis. financial weak link analysis. Where in the business cycle do you focus? And to me, this is at the heart of our discussion that you're going to introduce: ultra high density grazing, 100% use grazing. When we get into that discussion, deciding how hard to push the animals given your current situation is really important. This holistic perspective: is it really essential to push ultra high density grazing at all times? And the answer to me is it depends. At times it works well, and at times it will work against you. And I look forward to that conversation.
Oh, you brought up so many things. I could take this in so many different directions, but we'll stay focused on total utilization. So I guess to start, before I even ask the other questions, what would you define? And you brought it up beautifully that there's so many different definitions within this industry, that how would you define total utilization? What does that look like?
I like to take it back to this. If you read accounts of the explorers, the Europeans who arrived and had not seen the size of herds and the level of utilization that occurred naturally before we chopped up everything and fenced it off and wiped out the wildlife, that total utilization is best described. What did the land look like after a 4-day massive herd of migrating animals moved across a landscape? If you read those accounts, many of them talk about it looked as if a fire had passed over the land. There was that little standing material that it looks as if it was consumed by fire. There are accounts of trek oxen, settlers in wagons, moving behind a herd, and the animals are starving. There's that little forage left. To me, that explains total utilization. What's not eaten, gone through a rumen, is pulverized. And that is how this ecosystem evolved. We can take this discussion in any which direction. This grassland ecosystems, prairie ecosystems, semi-arid ecosystems, places with limited rainfall, evolved with, at times, who knows how often, very, very intense grazing, very, very intense trampling, and extended periods of time for that ecosystem to recover. I want to put fire on the side here, because I think there's too much reliance on this idea that the reason we have trees is because of fire. And I'm, from my experience, have seen that without fire, you can kill trees, you can change ecosystem function simply by the density and the level of utilization of the forage that's out there. You can change and actually not be able to grow trees because of the high density. So there is definitely a case in my mind for ultra high density, creating a self-sustaining grassland ecosystem. Yes, there were fires, but is it fire-driven that keeps it grassland, or is it animal-driven that keeps it grassland? I favor the latter. But that's another conversation in a way, because that pulls us away from the economic discussion, the genetics discussion. But I think it's an important part of realizing we have lost our ability to discern and to appreciate how important large herds of ungulates hunted by pack hunting predators, how fundamentally important that was. We don't remember, we have no proper accounts of what that correct ecosystem function for grassland ecology looks like.
Oh, you brought up so many good points for me to ask about. Well, let's just start with, I guess, what would be, if someone properly totally utilized, what would be the positives that they would see if, and this is the biggest thing, if the proper rest is given them? What would they see? And then I know it depends on location, on how
Well,
fast those
I
are.
think this is a really important consideration. What would they see is, with given the right amount of recovery, you'd see an accelerated mineral, all the things that come from an accelerated mineral cycle. So that's more food available for microbes, that's more food available for grass. So you're going to see initially everything wanting to germinate, from desirable species of plant to undesirable of species. It's a kickstart. It's the same sort of thing if you have a piece of land that hasn't had animals on it for a very long time and you burn it. The initial response is a jolt to the system. It's a major shock disruption to the system. And after that, you get everything wanting to germinate. And the harder you've grazed it, the more species, the more recovery jolt, meaning everything wants to respond after that jolt to the system. So you do see incredible number of plants germinating, positive and negative. Trees, everything just want to get going. That's the first thing you're going to see. With enough recovery, is it a one-off? How frequently do you come back? That's when this complexity starts building in. How do you come back? When do you come back? That's the initial piece. And what most people are missing here is it's the acceleration of that mineral cycle. It's taking a lot of standing material, putting it through a rumen, making whatever nutrients were there readily available to the microbes, to everything. So it's a kickstart.
Okay. And then would you classify it as maybe awakening the archaic seed bed and seeing different
Yeah. Yeah,
plant food?
yes, definitely. I think what's interesting here is that there's so much seed available. There's so much viable seed still there. You're probably not going to get the full expression of the seed bank that's there because many of the dormant seeds will remain dormant until you've created an ecosystem, a soil situation so that the seeds are ready. That quorum sensing, that microbial interaction with the seed outside wakes them up to be able to germinate. So, yeah, although you're going to get a huge number of seeds germinating, the really high yielding, highly desirable plants will probably need multiple iterations of that before the situation, depending. I mean, it depends on where you are how degraded, how asleep is your ecosystem function when you start out the process. It depends, yeah.
Okay. So, and this almost sounds a little counterintuitive. Well, and I've only been in the regenerative ag circle for a short time, but it seems counterintuitive to what we've heard primarily is take half, leave half, because you want to leave that soil covered.
Well, I think I'm going to counter that and say I think the take half, leave half is the simple understanding that if you take a larger proportion of the plants, it takes longer for the plant to get reproductive or not reproductive, to get growing again. So by taking less, you're not depleting root reserves, you're leaving more photosynthetic area. And the theory here is if you only take half, the plant will recover and you'll overall get more forage more quickly. That is absolutely correct. What you're missing, though, is where is the ecosystem function most lacking. The more of the plant material you put through a rumen, the
Okay.
more minerals, nutrients are going to be available for the next go round. So, what you lose out in short term photosynthetic panels out there, you're going to make up for in accelerated nutrient cycling. If you take half, leave half, you only recycling half the nutrients. So you can't get the same impact. You'll get a quicker recovery, but you're not going to get that full nutrient reload, if you like. And the tragedy with the take half, leave half philosophy is you can't teach animals or tell animals to graze half of all the plants. They will graze all of one plant that they really like. They'll graze half of the plants they don't really like, and they won't graze any of the plants that they really dislike. And with that, depending on where you are, we call it partial recovery, partial rest. It becomes a much more negative situation because you'll end up with overutilization of the plants that you really do want. Who knows where for the middle of the road plants and the ones that you don't want never get utilized, depending on which they are and where they are in that ecological progression, successional progression. They may die of non-use or they may just really thrive with non-use. That depends on the species. So you don't make great progress with a graze half, leave half all of the time. And the next question to me becomes, so when should you be grazing more deeply, more densely, 100%, and when should you be grazing more lightly? And to me, that's a critical question that not enough people are asking. It's either you're a 100% or an ultra high density grazer, or you're not. And if you're not, you're doing the ecology bad. Well, I know very well that's a balancing act. At times, you should be grazing really deep, really hard. 100% to me is a little bit heavy because you've got the ecological side to balance. You're balancing animal performance versus ecosystem function all of the time. And starting out with too heavier utilization, you hurt your animal performance too much. So, to me, as an advisor coming into this, as someone who's made multiple mistakes, pushing ecological function too hard and not paying enough attention to the economics of the animals. I did that way too much over way too much of my ranching career. It is a balancing act. And although my advisors were warning me, my mentors were warning me, Wayne, slow down on the ecological improvement, I pushed too hard and hurt my business so that I wasn't able to invest in the infrastructure that I needed to get to the next level because I was pushing the animals too hard. Wonderful ecological recovery, but I battled on the ecological side. And that's where, to me, the idea of weak link analysis, theory of constraint really, really becomes valuable, helping me as a producer, as a manager, decide I need to be focusing on animal performance in this environment, which means don't graze so heavy. That changes moving into a drier cycle, drier conditions, higher livestock number. Now I need to be focusing on growing more forage. Now is the time to be pushing the density, pushing the recovery times, being very, very conscious of that aspect. You don't have to do both at the same time. I listen to, wonderful examples of regeneration. You think of Alejandro, and a whole lot of those Chihuahuan ranchers really telling you about the ultra high density that they're using and the wonderful results. Yes, they're going to get wonderful results from ultra high density grazing. The part that concerns me about the story is, well, what's happening with the animal performance? If you're continually pushing ultra high density, you are continually pushing your animal performance lower because of that lack of selection. And if you do that all the time, wet season and dry season, or dry, not season, wet cycle, wet years, if you push ultra high density grazing, you're going to push your grass production, your forage production way, way, way beyond what you are able to stock. If you're not balancing animal performance with the animals that you have or the cash flow that you have to restock or upstock, you'll end up with so much forage in front of you that you can't use it for the animals you've got. So how are you going to finance the additional animals? You're spending all this time on growing more grass that you actually can't utilize. It's getting out of balance. And that's the scary part to me about encouraging everyone to do ultra high density grazing in a wet cycle. In a dry cycle, I would say it's much less dangerous so long as you know how much forage you've got and you know the risk from where you're starting to when you can anticipate that rainfall arriving and you having reliable growth. It's this balancing act the whole time.
And that leads to the next question, because I was going to ask you, I find this topic fascinating just due to the fact I accidentally fell into total utilization because I could not keep up with the cows, hauling water and building the fence. And I was mortified after we moved them out of each pasture because it was just like, oh my gosh, we're taking it all. But now it was on a wet year though. So then I came back 4 months later and it is amazing amount of growth.
Right. Right.
But the question is the kind of animal or maybe the genetics that you can push away. Do you think people should find animals that have already been in that sort of structure and try to purchase those animals? Or is there a way to do both of the balancing act and using the animals they currently have?
So I'm going to go off on a tangent on this question.
Yes.
I think my big eye opener to this question came with a workshop that Fred Provenza put on and realizing how important maternal genetics is for your environment. This incredible value of mom teaching baby what to eat in your local environment. The idea that you can bring the perfect animal, which doesn't exist, from another environment, someone else's ranch, some other region, to your environment and expect them now to adapt and just fit in and produce is not realistic. It's just not how it works. So local genetics, animals that are familiar with the local environment, that can teach their offspring which plants to eat in which order at different times in different seasons is really important. And you could say, well, but we're doing 100% utilization, so that makes no difference. There's lots of evidence that animals that are able to select will outperform animals that don't select. There's the other reality that when you start out, you've probably got a pretty low quality of nutrition, pretty low succession level of plants. And even if you've got pretty high succession plants with high potential, their nutritional status is actually low because, well, you're starting out. You don't have that legacy built yet that is going to enable the animals to have this high quality nutrition. You're starting. So how do you get through the hoops and jump through to get to the next level? And the answer is incrementally. You improve the genetics a little bit by selection and maybe infusion of bulls that are known, have a reputation, come from a herd of managing the way you want to manage. And at the same time, you're incrementally improving the quality of the forage. And this is where, to me, holistic management helped me so much. It's helping me decide. Right now, I need to be focusing on the animal performance piece. No, it's shifted. We've had 2 wonderful rainstorms and it's 2 months later and now we've got grass. Well, now we're shifting our emphasis to somewhere else. As these conditions change, your focus changes. And for me, weak link analysis, the testing questions enable me to not be panicking or confused about what should I be focusing on. To me, this is the essence. This is where do I focus my attention, my money, my time. Ultra high density grazing, all you're doing is moving those animals, you're making sure that they're eating. Yes, you're watching the animal performance, but if you're making them eat at all, your animal performance is going to suffer.
Yeah.
And, where's the trade-off? There is always a trade-off. It's your time, it's the return on the animals, there's supplement costs change. I think from my helping ranchers in the States that the margins in Southern Africa are actually a lot tighter. We have a smaller profit margin per head, per unit than you do in the US. Some years it made sense for us to feed supplementary feed, and other years we just had to cull. The margins were that tight. So there are multiple inputs here, and where's your decision making? Where's the money and the ecology and the animal performance? Where's your focus of attention going to be? And that's relative. Helping me decide when was the time to focus on which made such a difference to feeling in control, to feeling like I was on top of the decision making. That was huge. That was really, really important.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this. But if somebody pushed their cattle, so you're sacrificing performance.
Yep.
So you're pushing your cattle through it. Could somebody over time, the question is how hard is too hard in means of pushing the cattle? Because if you could push cows through and you lose 10 head, you're calling them out because they couldn't cut it. They're not putting enough into their calf because you're pushing them hard.
Right.
So their calf isn't doing well. So you called them out. But you got out of that 100 cows, you got 80 or 90 that did a great job.
Right.
So then over time, could the environment could you breed that in a way?
Absolutely. I mean, to me, there's no question that is the right way to do it. So there's 2 ways to breed your animals better. The one is to bring in genetics that is better suited. And there's the biggest short-term return is cull out the ones, as you point out, the ones that don't get you there. Mostly they're going to show up as they didn't conceive, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the most obvious way. Culling because the calf's too small, that's a difficult one because sometimes the smaller animal is going to help have less drain on the mother so that she does reconceive. That's where measuring and deciding what kind of animal you're trying to produce, this idea that bigger calf is always better, means that bigger calf is going to have a bigger draw on mom. Bigger calf is going to come from a bigger cow. And that philosophy, that way of thinking has got us to bigger and bigger and bigger animals and actually poorer and poorer reconception rates simply because of metabolic rate. And that difference between maintenance on a small animal and maintenance on a much bigger animal, the small animal generally wins. I made lots of mistakes early on in my career thinking that I could visually look at an animal, arrogantly thought I could look at an animal and know which one was the better one to choose. And I was taught very, very early on. I could go into a story about how that happened, but just realizing I'm not a good judge of which my replacement heifer should be. It's easy to select out the runts and the awfuls, but after that awful, all the way to the best animals, which ones should be chucked out and which ones should be kept, the more I can leave that decision to nature, to the ecosystem conditions, the better, because that means I'm going to keep all the good ones and sell all the ones that didn't get bred pretty easily. Me not being part of that decision process, that's a good thing to keep me out of it. Let the bull decide or let the conditions decide which ones are going to get rebred. These are really important policy discussions. Especially in my dad and my situation, we developed what is our breeding policy, what is our selection policy, so that we weren't having disagreements on the day of selection. It was pretty clear this is how we were going to do it, this is why we were going to do it. And with the policy, he could select or I could select, yeah, we'll have a little bit of bias, but suddenly we're not disagreeing on which animal now needs to be kept and which one doesn't need to be kept based on our preferences. I think that was a hugely valuable part of the selection process. Probably digressed a little bit there, but it's so often subjective when it shouldn't be. It's so often I think versus what you think. And actually, the big animal often looks better to us and is not the better animal to select.
Right. Right. I love letting Mother Nature decide, but I also understand there's a fine line that of pushing too hard. Because you push too hard, you're going to end up calling them all.
And it's, this is the other reality here. You'll know as well, Sadie, when you go and look at your herd, you're going to have some that are battling and you're going to have a portion that are just flying no matter what you've done. And then there's the middle piece and you're actually managing for the middle, right? The culls are at the bottom easy. The ones at the top are flying no matter what. And now it's a percentage game. And I do get concerned when I hear people saying, I got an 80% or I got a 99% breed back because that means they're really not pushing their animals. Does that mean every year they got a 99? Because we really need to get in, I believe, need to get into the measurement of pounds per acre as the productivity measure. And that has not got a high correlation to a 99% reconception rate. It doesn't have a high correlation to a larger weaning weight per head. When we get into those measures, we are looking at individual animal performance. We're looking at pride in animal looks and weights that is not related to pounds per acre. And when you start looking at pounds per acre and dollars per acre, smaller is almost always better.
Yeah.
And the weaning weights and the weaning percentages seem to have a lot less of a direct correlation. I think what we measure and what we focus on here is an important part of that discussion. And when we're selecting, I did not have brag about reconception rates in my animals. I had brag about improvement in my ecological conditions, on my carrying capacity, on the volume of forage I produced. My dad would very happily say he was a stockman. I would very happily say I was an ecology improver. I did not have the wonderful genetics that my dad had. I carried a lot more pounds per acre than my dad did over a pretty short period of time. To me, those focuses are really important to decide on. There's nothing wrong with whichever side you want to select and whichever numbers you prefer, but recognize that there's a trade-off. I think that's really critical here.
Okay. Well, and so then that leads to the next question of if somebody decided, and they're in the dormant season right now, and coming up into the growing season here, they're going to make the decision to do 100% utilization. What data or information do they need to take first? Like looking back at it now, I'm already well past it because I've already dabbled with total utilization. But I could go back in time and redo it. And I would spend 1 year initially doing totally selective grazing, bigger pastures that the cows can eat whatever they want to eat, and then we move quickly through. So focus solely on how well can the cow perform. That would be the focus.
Yeah, I'd say that the first thing for me to decide here is when am I expecting it to grow again?
Yeah.
Okay, so when's that? I call it green date. When's
Okay.
it going to be? There going to be enough green forage on the ground. So that's an average, right? It's an average. Then I want to add on to that a drought reserve. So expected grass to, I'm pretty damn sure I'm going to have enough new growth on the ground. So right now, am I going to do that easily and have some grass left with the animals that I've got, or is it going to be tight?
Yeah. Okay.
Because that's actually now looking at a couple of things. It's looking at a real inventory of how much forage do I have
Yeah.
and how much risk am I prepared to take in getting to that drought safe date, green date plus the drought. If it's going to be tight, that's a consideration. Is that making sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just didn't
Yeah.
know if you should take cow records. So then you wean the calves, you weigh the calves. You know what the cow can get accomplished.
So you've got the forage, you've got your forage assessment. I'm going to be tight or I'm not going to be tight.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to be tight and you've made the decision, I'm keeping these animals, I'm not going to destock, but I can get through to drought safe date. Are you going to buy some extra forage or am I going to just, what's my preference here? Because this is a risk profile discussion, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
This is before we're looking at how heavily we actually going to graze, because this is the first consideration. The next consideration is as I'm moving my animals, am I going to go for one selection or am I going to go two selections? In other words, I'm going to cream the easy side of the year and leave some drought reserve for that last period and do a second selection, if you like. So
Yeah.
these are all part of what am I going to do? Because
Yeah.
I would be in the preference of use my best forage to the to the green date and then use the scraps for my drought reserve.
Okay.
Now, depending on your choice, if you're a 100% utilization person, you're going to say, I'm going to use it all, right? To
Yeah.
get, and I don't like that, but that's your choice. Now you're
Yeah.
watching how's your animal performance doing,
Right.
right?
Right.
So now you're measuring how are my animals holding up? Remembering when they get to calve date, they've got to be in a certain body condition score. Otherwise, they're not going to reconceive. The horse is bolted. If you get to calving date and they are thin, you're going to lose a massive percentage of the
Hmm.
cows.
Yeah.
You're going to have to kick them out. You're going to give them a second chance. That's too expensive to contemplate. So you've got to be monitoring across your dormant season. How are they performing? Now you've got lots of decisions to make. They're
Hmm.
not eating enough. Am I going to supplement?
Yeah.
What am I going to supplement? And what's the cost to keep them on that trajectory to get them into body condition score at calving? If it's 100% and you're doing that, okay, and it's fitting your economic plan of forage, that's great.
Yeah.
The feed price climbs, it's not economic. You've got a decision to sell to keep that animal performance. This is where the grazing planning, to me, the detailed grazing planning to me is essential because now you're tracking, I'm on track, my utilization rate is on track, and my
Yeah.
animal performance is on track, or mostly, oh hell, it's going better than I expected, very
Yeah.
seldom. It's going worse than I expected. I can feed more, or I'm going to have to sell.
Yeah.
And those are your measures as you're going along. And the closer you are to ultra high density, the more carefully you're going to be watching that animal performance trajectory relative to your plan of utilization. If you're not doing that, you're kidding yourself. You're just never going to get to an economic outcome.
Right. Exactly.
And I think a massively important point here is when you're doing density grazing, the right recovery period and a better utilization than the last time you did it is far more important
Yeah.
than a total graze. When you're
Right.
starting out, you're going to hurt yourself if you're not experienced and you don't have the right genetics. If you push anything close to 100% utilization, you're still going to get a lot of improvement if you're giving adequate recovery and you're utilizing more of the forage that's on the land. Those should be the startup goals, not 100% utilization because
Right.
of the risk of falling off the bus.
Right. I think you nailed it on the most important aspect of anybody looking at doing this.
And you know, the ultra high density works. There's no question that it works. The problem is keeping your animal performance at the right level and getting that really deep graze. Yes, you're going to get great response.
Yeah.
But when you get that response, are you ready with the capital to buy the extra animals to utilize that extra feed? I did this. I grew way too much forage my animal performance collapsed because I had way too much old forage. And I
Okay.
didn't have the money to buy the animals to take the space of the extra forage I've grown.
Yeah.
Most people aren't discussing that particular point. And I think I've seen it hurt a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Personally, I've been there. So,
Mhm. See, and the easy solution that pops in my mind for that would be I can think of five, six people off the top of my head that are looking for forage, more forage.
mhm,
And so bringing
mhm,
in outside animals, but the question about bringing outside animals is, are they used to your environment? So are they local critters?
mhm,
And then what's your plan on your intention? Are you going to force them to do 100% utilization?
mhm.
Especially if they're not used to it, the other owner is not going to want to push their cattle that way.
And I think there's another important, just a practical point. It's echoing what you're saying. My
Yeah.
animals were used to fairly high density. They were used to the competition of grazing.
Yeah.
I'm talking about competition, a big cow or a dominant cow and a subordinate cow next to each other. They're walking along close together. You can watch the subordinate cows moving towards a grass species, a grass plant that it likes. Big cow sees her speed up, bashes her, steals the grass. Big cow, the dominant cow, eat, eat, eat. Watch this little cow, gets excited, bashes her away. This is the change that happens when you go to higher and higher and higher density grazing. Yes, there's a point where it doesn't matter and they eat like crazy from the get-go. When I brought animals, outside animals, into my herd, most of them could not compete
Yeah.
with the animals already in my herd. It's a progression. There's a type of animal, there's a mindset, there's a both getting used to, getting acclimatized, getting used to this new way of doing things. Some can, some can't. So, how hard do you knock a herd that's never been put subjected to density and competition for generations and generations? The majority of cattle in the US have never had to compete.
Right.
They have a massive selection. Now suddenly you change that and you expect them to be competing like a UFC fighter.
Mhm.
Because that's the reality. This is a nutritional war. They're fighting for the best nutrition. They're used to selection, and now you're forcing them to fight for it. Some of us fight, some of us don't fight. And that's, you have to help those animals get there gradually. If you
Yeah.
don't, okay, you'll make much faster progress, but you're going to hurt yourself financially. So, where are you on that trajectory?
Right. I think that's a phenomenal point and not one that I thought of. So,
Yeah.
okay. So then, and I guess the last question I have, because I'm sure people want to know, what is your definition of recovery? And I understand you can't say totally utilize and in 15 months you can be back because it
Mhm.
depends on your rainfall. I get that. So how would you blanket recovery? Blanket define.
I think a really important part of ecological improvement is being very clear on what you want your ideal piece of land to look like, down to the species. So, in my answer, I'm saying if you want tall grass prairie in Texas, for example, this is what the historic accounts say. You had these species of grass growing here and they were extremely productive. And I want to recreate tall grass prairie in North Texas. You want to be identifying down to the species. I want these species and those species of grass. So recovery to me is sufficient time for the species that I want here that have been grazed and are now recovered. And what does recovery mean? That they are probably post three leaf stage. So they've gone beyond, a tiller's gone up one leaf, two leaf, three leaf. They've now on the process of at least producing their fourth leaf. I'm not saying that they need to be sending up an inflorescence. I think there's an overemphasis on seeding, but certainly there needs to be at least three leaves and probably a fourth on the tiller of the desirable species that you want, that you have and are aiming towards. I think far too often, why am I saying that? The species related. Far too often we look at the species that are the fastest to recover and judge this piece of land has recovered based on the first species to recover And that means that in general, we are recovering or coming back to graze far too soon.
Yeah. Okay.
Was that
Um,
convoluted? It sounded like a very complex answer, but to me,
no, I think
that's,
that it's
yeah.
very straightforward and pointed on looking for the plants that you do want, their recovery specifically.
Yeah, because you think about it, some plants just they recover in a flash. And
Yeah.
we generally want quick recovery. We want to go back quickly.
Yep.
It's our mindset,
Oh, I've
and
been guilty of that.
it's too soon. Generally, it's too soon, and we will knock the ones that we really want way too hard. They'll never actually get a good recovery. I think, 30, 40-day recovery is way too short in most environments, even wet, really moist environments. And I see a lot of people saying, oh, we got a 30, 40, 50-day recovery, and I think they do a lot better with heavier grazes and that long recovery. But as I say that, I can see the faces that are going to be saying, yeah, he's talking nonsense. Because it really does depend. I mean, it does depend on the growing conditions. There's so many variables here, but stay with the definition and I'll be a lot safer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I could make this so much longer, but I know we're towards the end. But is there anything you covered so many wonderful things and defined beautifully so many oh
Yeah, I just really would encourage people who are intrigued with this process or what I'm describing to think of the journey as a management journey of continual improvement, that you're not trying to do everything all at the same time. There are times to be focusing on animal performance. I'm not saying you stop moving your animals, but the priority of movement becomes secondary to animal performance. And there are other times when rain is tight or moisture is tight and growth is tight, that the animal condition is actually less of a focus and the focus on growth is much higher up the priority list. You can't do it all at the same time. You don't need to. There's always a constraint. And focusing on your constraint makes your investment decisions easier. It makes where you spend your time easier. And this is what holistic management has to offer. To me, the real crux of what we're trying to do is not try and do everything all the time. It's shift the priority. So by all means, do 100% graze, ultra high density grazing when it suits the situation. But to do that all year, every year, without fail, I feel is missing the point. You're going to run yourself ragged, and I don't think it's, in all cases, the most beneficial way to look at things. That's why we call it holistic.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. Now, if people have questions, they want to get HMI out on their property, do they need to contact you or what is the contact stream, if one?
I mean, people are welcome to contact me. I'm executive director at Holistic Management International. I know the context that I came from. I think the principles apply, but very often people do want to get hold of someone from a region who have experience in a region similar to their own. And our holistic management educator community is ideal for that. These are people who love what they do. Most of them are producers. Most of them are out on the land every day. They're using holistic management and they will understand your local environment much better than I ever could. And they're the people to get hold of. So if you go to our website and look up an educator close to you, those would be ideal people to get hold of.
Perfect. Well, I think that pretty much covers it, unless you have anything else you want to make sure that we get in there. Good to go?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. No, I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you on here in the future again and on a different subject matter. I just thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you're so welcome.